Welcome to Thriving in Business and Life. I'm Christopher Harding.
And I'm Will Wilkinson. So it's good to be back in the saddle. We've been interviewing people for a while. Today it's just you and me.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we've had some wonderful guests on talking about different topics, some of them related to our book, some of them not. And
you've been on a big trip down to Brazil?
I just got back from Brazil. Yeah, amazing trip.
Well, it sounded like that movie, If This Is Tuesday, It Must Be Belgium. I mean, you did a lot down there.
Yeah, there was a number of cities in multiple cities in a day, and a lot of great training sessions and consulting. And I just absolutely love the people in Brazil. They're just wonderfully open-hearted and have such a hunger to learn and continue to evolve and grow. So it was
and we
phenomenal.
should say hello to them because we have some listeners in Brazil.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Então, bom dia e boa tarde para todos. Estou aqui pensando em vocês.
What he said. Okay, well, today, what are we doing today?
Well, we've been having guests on, and part of the reason we have is we just happen to have had access to some really interesting people. But the other part is we've kind of been in the lab, like
no kidding,
mad scientists of a sort.
Right, the thriving lab of Ashland.
Yeah, so you think about we wrote the book Thriving in Business and Life last year. We published it first quarter of this year. And we've had a chance to incorporate it in our coaching and in our training and in our consulting. And the notion you and I both came up with is, wow, we'd really like to make this more accessible to more people. So I can't remember which one of us came up with the crazy idea to turn it into also an online
Let's
training.
just assume that was my idea, since it's turned out to be such a good one. Well, we really have been in the lab, and I think a lot of our listeners will be creative people who know what we are going through, where you create one thing, and then as you do that, you realize it can become something else. And you start the morphing process, and in that process, you learn a lot more about what you created.
Yeah, well, that's so true, because I know as we started into saying, how can we take the information in the book and really turn it into more of an interactive process for people who might not be able to come to a course that we teach or might not have access to us as coaches, but that we could, share with them the knowledge and wisdom that, was shared with us originally that we're passing along. And so as we got into it, like you said, I think the thing that's been fascinating for me is I understand the book far better than I did when we wrote it.
Me too. It's funny because I've written a number of books, and this often happens. I'll look at it and say, did I write that? Because I'm reading something that, for whatever reason, impacts me, and I can't remember having written that.
Yeah, so this has been an interesting process. The last 6 months we've been really creating an online course that connects with the book. And we decided to do something kind of novel. Instead of having it be simply an online training, we came up with this kind of interesting approach, I think.
Yeah, and again, who knows if it was your idea, my idea, or just dropped out of the ether, but we at a certain point realized that it isn't really a training course, it's a game. And we call it a full immersion game because you play during your day. You don't kind of put your life on hold to play a game. Your life becomes the game. Yeah,
and I that concept's always been fascinating to me in general. I can't remember how we came up with it. Let's play like it was a dream one of us had, but because I think it was actually. But that whole idea that the first part of what you get in the online course or game is a section that we call Learn It. So we share with you the details, the information, kind of the nuggets you need to know in order to then go apply that knowledge in your day-to-day life.
And I remember the breakthrough we had surrounded our concern based on our experience for follow-through and integration, that a lot of education, a lot of training seems to be important at the time.
Right.
And we scribble notes and we, get insights and have epiphanies. Several weeks down the road, did it even happen?
Yeah.
It's just a vague memory. So I know both of us have been very interested in finding unique ways to make whatever information we provide stick and result in actual changes in people's lives, improvements.
Yeah, so kind of how we decided to deal with that is that if you're going through the course one section at a time, one module at a time, each module has with it a game challenge. Mm-hmm. And that, the challenge is to go apply in a specific way the principle that particular module is about. Mm-hmm. And
for instance, in Module 1, just so that listeners know what we're talking about, is about storytelling.
Right, the power of
story. So the challenge there is tell a new story to improve some situation in your life.
Yeah, and the idea being that, we impose meaning on what happens all the time. Something happens, and then we make it mean something. So what we're saying is decide what you want to make it mean, and make it mean something that's actually going to lead you in a productive, positive direction. And then play that out, act out that role of that particular story.
Yeah, so in other words, instead of just presenting the theory, we invite people to take that and apply it to some specific situation in their life and track what happens.
Yeah. And so we've had a lot of fun with this. I mean, I think the thing that's been great for us as we've been, experimenting and writing and developing this course is that we've been taking on the game challenges each week.
Well, I find myself often thinking, boy, I can't wait to do this. I'm doing it as we write it, but I want to just have the finished product and be able to do it.
Yeah, it was, I had a really great experience leading up to this trip in Brazil, actually. I was having a few challenges with just some logistics. Now, that could be frustrating. I'm trying to go out of the country. I'm trying to do something that's really useful, I hope, to people. And here I'm having some logistical challenges. So part of what it was is I used our visioning process to, really envision what do I want. I see myself there. Everything's gone smoothly. And, it feels so great. I was using the techniques we use in our fourth module about vision first. And what was fun is as I began to apply that, because I was acting as if everything was going to turn out fine, I was actually creating a new story about it, the people that were helping me on my logistical end were like, yeah, okay. Suddenly what could have been a big problem turned into a very simple solution.
Well, see, what you were doing, of course, you were doing the processes we've been developing, but you were doing something that all of us do very naturally. And yet we haven't been able to harness the power of it, which is kind of daydreaming and thinking about what we're going to do and wondering here, wondering there. We all do this, but very few people know how to focus it and make it deliberate the way you did to get some actual results.
Right.
And that's the difference.
Yeah. And so what we've done is with each module, it's about a particular aspect of thriving. So as we were talking about, the first one's about story, the second one's about bias, then there's one about values and one about visioning and so on. And in each of those modules, there's a learn it aspect, and it has, some components in there that you learn.
Usually 6 to 11 specific learning components.
Yeah. And then the next piece, which we have a lot of fun with, is the second part of each module is what we call imagine it.
Yeah, and this is actually what's been missing in a lot of creative processes. I can speak for myself along the way. Yes, you learn some things, and then you want to apply those things. So that's theory becoming practice. But the step in between, which we've inserted, is imagining what it will be like to do that. Yeah. And running what we call a simulation and even troubleshooting what could go wrong. I mean, this is what athletes do and performers do. They imagine the perfect shot. They imagine the audience loving their performance. They're using their imaginal muscles before they actually apply what they've learned. Yeah,
and it really, and basically we're programming ourselves to start looking for the ways that this can become successful or that we can apply it. And so this each one of these modules, it's one of my favorite parts of it, is that you imagine yourself going through the game challenge and actually see yourself being successful at it.
Right, and also with the troubleshooting, trying to catch some things that could go wrong.
Yeah, up front to prepare you. Yeah, so we guide people through it. And then we decided, for ourselves, we know what's really helpful for our clients is a lot of times they'll touch base with us when they're working through a challenge. So we got the kind of wild idea, let's create some audio coaching devices so that people can listen to one in the morning and one at night to really kind of encourage them and check in with them to help them get better and better at applying the game challenge.
It's funny, I've been editing those, and consistently I'm taking things out because I realize that we want to cut to the chase.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. People want to cut to the chase. We want to get to it rather than kind of talk about it, just get right into it.
Yeah. So we've been having a lot of fun with that. And the last aspect of it, of course, is so you learn it, you imagine it, and then you live it.
Yeah.
You do it.
Yeah,
So
bring it right into your life. And, we do talk about brain science and the fact that what fires together, wires together. We can change our brains. Our brains can change themselves, and we can create new neural pathways. But the key, and I'd love you to say a little more about this because this is something you introduced, the key is to repeat it often enough that you get past a tipping point. Talk about that.
Yeah, so if you think of, you were saying what fires together, wires together. If we're doing something regularly enough, we're basically creating kind of like a superhighway in the brain, and it's the superhighway of a habit, you could say. So if you're going to create a new highway, what you've got to do is practice traveling down the new highway regularly enough and enjoying and celebrating the success of it, because that releases dopamine into our system, which helps forge new neural pathways to where you begin to actually create a highway that's easier to travel down than the previous one.
Yeah.
That could take a few weeks, but the main thing is to keep at it. Even if you slip and start going down the old road occasionally, don't let that stop you. Go right back and head down the new highway, because if we don't practice it regularly enough, we basically fall back into the old pattern.
Well, that's the thing, and that was very impressive to me, just reading the way you framed that, is that if we don't practice it enough, we'll slip back into the old way as soon as a trigger shows up.
Yeah.
The familiar trigger will trigger an old habit. I learned about this many years ago when I read Rupert Sheldrake's first book, A New Science of Life. He's a British biologist. And he diagrammed it really beautifully, for laymen. He talked about a bed of sand, a vertical bed of sand, like a bank of sand. And you take a ball bearing and you roll it down the sand. As it goes down, the first time it goes down, it's completely random. It could go anywhere, depending on where you started it. But as it goes down, the weight of the ball bearing creates a furrow in the sand. Now you grab it and you roll it down again. Now there's a statistical possibility, a preference that ball bearing will go down where it went before, because there's a little furrow there. If it does, it makes the furrow deeper.
Right.
Third time it's deeper until you've got an actual crevice, at which point it's almost impossible to get the ball bearing to go anywhere else. He used that to demonstrate how habits form. The more often you do them, the more you tend to repeat them, the harder it is to change them.
Well, and that's, if you think about it, it's because if you kind of made the analogy that the ball bearing is placed at the beginning of the furrow, that's why it's going to go down it. So that's what the trigger is, basically.
That's
right. So what
there you are, right at the top of that furrow.
Yeah. So what you're trying to do with creating a new habit is that from the very onset you frame it differently. That's why telling a new story becomes so important, because if I'm telling the old story, those patterns of behavior are so well established that it's easy to fall into them. But if I assign myself a new character role, and I'm envisioning a new outcome, and I'm actually feeling what it's going to feel like any good actor who doesn't really act, they actually take on the character. If I take on that new character, I'm establishing a new furrow right from the beginning.
Well, this is really instructive, because it's a distinct difference between I'm trying really hard not to do that thing I've decided I don't want to do, versus I'm really enjoying this new thing that I've decided to do.
Well, and this is a part of what we really emphasize throughout this whole, game that we've created for people. We call it a learning game, of leadership development. And the idea here is that you're having fun.
Yeah.
Even though you may be dealing with challenging situations, a big part of keeping the brain in high performance mode is to be having fun, even when it's difficult.
Well, one of my favorite films, which some of our listeners will have seen, is The King of Hearts. You remember that old film with Alan Bates?
Oh, wow.
Genevieve Bujold, I think, her first role. It's a fascinating story that relates to exactly what we're talking about. A town gets evacuated in France, and the insane asylum empties, and all the inmates come out and pretend that they're the barber, the banker, the madame. And in comes an infantryman. Alan Bates doesn't know this. He can't understand why everybody's having such a good time. And he's serious, because he's a warrior and they're going to have a war. And the movie is all about what is insanity, actually.
Yeah.
It's a very, very insightful story, because you see that these people who are locked up because they're crazy, they may be crazy, but they're sure having a good time.
Yeah, as you're saying that, I flash back to a psychology class I had in college. And my professor's name was B.J. White. He was just a phenomenal guy, hilarious. And as a result, you remembered a lot of things. But I remember him talking about what is crazy, what is insanity. And he drew this, bell curve, a distribution curve, and he said, if you're within this bell curve in any given society, what it considers to be normal, then you're considered to be okay. If you start to stray outside the boundaries of this, you're considered to be, maybe a little odd.
Marginal.
And the farther out you get, you're crazy unless you're rich or an artist, and then you're simply eccentric.
I get it. Exactly.
And so, it's a lot of times, I remember when I first started applying some of the things we're talking about here years ago that I was learning from my coach. I was approaching really difficult situations, but I was coming at them from a standpoint of, this is fun.
Yeah.
This is, cool. This is a challenge. Yeah. And, initially people were like, you're happy about everything. And I was like, well, why not?
Well, you're raising another interesting point that we cover in the program, which is the whole range of feelings.
Right.
And the difference between reactive feeling and proactive feeling. And in our culture and the way we've been educated, we tend to think that all feeling is reactive. I feel good because this happened. I feel bad because that happened. Well, we introduced the idea of creating how you feel proactively.
Right.
Using your imagination, wondering, well, how will I feel when this has been successful? And then actually choosing to feel that way.
Right, but we're being generating the feeling we want. And it's interesting because there's another concept we get into in one of the modules about pendulation, which I think is a fascinating concept. And the more I've practiced this, as we've been working on it, the more I'm appreciating it. So I'll explain the notion. This is kind of one of your babies, so you tell me if I'm going to say it correctly. That I focus on my vision and what that feels like, and I really lean into that feeling and feel it, and then I swing back into current reality, and there might be a significant gap there, and I get really in touch with the way it is now, and maybe even exaggerated, like, oh, things are really challenging right now, and I feel that intensely as well, and I allow that to really create momentum for me to swing back even more strongly into the feeling of the vision and how great it feels.
Perfectly presented. Gold star. Yeah, and this is something we rarely do, and this is the problem with affirmations.
Right.
Where that's so one-sided. A person will, be dealing with financial challenges, so they'll go, I see the abundance of the universe descending upon me, $1,000 bills showing up, I'm wealthy, etc. And that's all they do. Well, for starters, who would do that except a poor person? Like, a rich person wouldn't do that. So they're kind of starting from an identity of scarcity. The pendulation model would be, I see the abundance of the universe, I experience the financial wealth, and then swinging back, I'm broke. I don't know how I'm going to cover my utility bill. I feel really desperate. I feel really in despair. Wow, this is great. I've got this new project that's going to generate a lot of money. I'm working hard at it. Oh man, how am I going to pay this bill?
Well, it's that moving back and forth between current reality and the vision. And what's interesting, I was coaching somebody just the other day, and they were faced with kind of a challenging situation. So I walked them through the visioning process, and they really leaned into it and felt it, and they were really excited about it. And I said, now, some things are going to come up during the week, in like it does in life, that are really challenging, and it might make you go, wow, I don't know, this is a big challenge. And their response was, well, I'll just push those aside. And I went, no. Don't go into denial. Lean into them.
Exactly.
Feel them really strongly, and let that motivate you to lean back into your feeling, and let your feeling then of the vision of what you want become your compass.
Yeah.
Let it start to guide you as to what road to take to get to the place where that feeling becomes real.
And there are a number of techniques that use this same kind of principle. My suspicion is that the success that people get using these techniques doesn't relate so much to the technique as to how the technique makes them feel like they're in charge of their life.
Yeah.
Because most people don't feel they are. That we're the victim of so many large forces, people out there, things that we can't influence. So to create some way of feeling, you know what, I'm really owning my life. I'm taking responsibility for it. I think that's what gets the results.
Well, because it has to start looking for things in a different way. And we've talked about how the brain works and helps us in that regard. But there's something that I've really become reacquainted with, I think, because this was a process I used in times past. But as we've been working through this together, it's given me a new spin on it. And so when I'll use the trip I just went on. When I was envisioning this trip, it was about a 6-month planning process, this last Brazilian trip. And as I was, envisioning it, I was envisioning being able to meet with people and have just, great interactions and really rich conversations, and be able to share things that were of value, and listen to them and gather things for their value. And I imagined myself being home, having just arrived home from the trip, and being, that wonderfully sense of being tired in a good way.
Yeah.
And going, wow, that was just such a fantastic trip. I'm so grateful for how everything turned out. Well, I kept that feeling alive, even when there were different frustrations with the logistics leading up to it. And I'd feel that, and then go, but you know what? This is going to be fantastic. And there's this thing that happens, you call it fusion. When I got home, and the trip turned out every bit as wonderfully as I could have imagined, and more so. And I realized I was in that moment where I was now actually experiencing what I'd been imagining myself to be experiencing in the future. And it's this really kind of odd, wonderful feeling, as if, time caught up with itself.
Yeah. Well, fusion is what I call it, because it seems like two things come together.
Yeah.
The feeling that you imagined you'd have, which you began to feel in advance, and then the actual feeling when you got to that moment in time.
Well,
something happens when those two meet.
Yeah,
which you just experienced.
Yeah, and it's I haven't quite got words for it. It's actually kind of a really wonderful thing. But it's as I think about it, and look at what we're imagining with this course. What we're imagining is that this becomes really wonderfully accessible to a lot of people. That they not only experience it and gain really great benefit from it, but they share it with friends and family and start to play the game together, because that's when it gets to be the best.
Absolutely, because we can support each other and learn from each other. I think one of the targets that I have in mind, based on my work with clients, is people who are stuck. They have some particular area where they're really stuck and they can't seem to get out of it. I really think that these materials can help people with that.
I agree. And I think especially if people are willing to play it with somebody else, or clearly in league with a coach is great, but in league even with friends, so that let's say we're both doing the module on the virus of bias, right? And this week, we both know we've got a challenge to catch biases when they creep up. One, if we're working together, obviously we can watch out for each other. But even not, we can check in at the end of the day. Hey, Will, how did it go for you? What came up for you?
Exactly.
And that because the great thing about this game is we're only competing with ourselves.
And there's no villains.
Right.
Games usually have stellar villains. You know, you're defeating someone. In this game, the way we're writing it, there's no villains. You came up with the great idea of recasting villains as teachers.
Right.
So the situation which we've before seen as a problem and something attacking us, an obstacle we want to get rid of, we reframe that, tell a different story. What can I learn from this?
Yeah, I mean, it's this kind of goes back, actually, for me, it was kind of an archetypal dream. My coach at the time was helping me work through a situation at the early stage of my career where I was having trouble with a boss. And he was saying, you know, you need to go in and meet with him and sit down and see him as somebody that you can learn from. That was his suggestion.
I wonder how you felt when you first heard that idea.
Oh man, I just was like, I mean, in so many ways, I didn't want to do it. Right?
Yeah, sure.
So I go home and I'm preparing for this, and I'm actually really nervous about it as I'm preparing. I'm kind of sweating bullets about it, and I have a dream the night before my meeting. I set up the meeting with the guy. I have a dream, and in this dream, I'm out on this stage in front of an audience. It was almost like Mozart times, you know. We're acting out this play and we've got masks on. And I come back after delivering just an amazing line, and the villain delivers an amazing line to me. And I come backstage, the villain's out there delivering his soliloquy, you know. And all of my fellow players are, you know, kind of congratulating me. Oh, that was so wonderful, you know. And I pull my mask off and I say, who's playing the villain tonight? He's just doing a fantastic job. And they go, isn't he great? He's so wonderful. He brings out some of the great things from us. Well, you know, the villain comes back from behind the stage and pulls off the mask, and that's my boss. And I realize, wow, so this is just a role that I have cast him in. And so when I went in, I treated him as if he'd been wearing a mask, and that what he was really there to do was to help me and teach me, and that we could partner in that way. And I told him that.
Oh, you did? What did he say?
It was one of the weirdest encounters I've ever had. He stopped and he said, "Are you serious about that?"
Really?
I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Great. Then let's change our roles. How can I help you? What can I do
just
to
like
assist
that?
you?" Yeah, I mean, just
on
like
a dime.
It was almost as if there was a shift in the cosmos or something. It was the strangest thing, and he ended up becoming a phenomenal guide for me to show me a different way of management that I was not familiar with.
This is a great example of how the stories we tell, the meaning we attribute to another person, a situation, actually become a reality when they may not be at all. This guy was actually quite different than you had cast him. Yeah,
now there were still things about him, to be clear, that were challenging for me, but that because I was now making those aspects of his personality mean that he was kind of being a Yoda to me, right? An Obi-Wan Kenobi of sorts. How I responded to those aspects of his personality was totally different.
Well, our 30 minutes has flown by here. We've just got 30 seconds, 60 seconds here. And I think as we go along in these next few podcasts, we'll keep talking about what we're learning as we package our material from the book into the course, and sharing with listeners what we hope will be of value to them. Yeah, so next week we'll take on, kind of talk you through our first module so you can get kind of a flavor for that and hopefully learn some valuable things that you can apply. And that will really be about creating stories that generate success. Yeah, and we can all create a new story if we choose to do so. All right. Well, if you want to reach out to us, you can reach us at thrivinginbusinessandlife@gmail.com. I'm Christopher Harding. And I'm Will Wilkinson. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you again next week.